I cut myself off in the middle of a sentence, and then I joined Sonia and Bridget in the middle of a sentence. So I probably cut off a lot of folks in the middle of getting to know you. I hope that this was the start of a great conversation, and we'll have opportunities to continue conversations together as we continue to learn and grow together as a group. I think you all discovered last year this is a great place to learn with folks, but also learn from folks. And together we are an amazing dynamic community of folks implementing Amplify Desmos Math in year 2. This probably goes without saying, but as part of this group, in order for everyone, including yourselves, to get the most out of it, like being active, being engaged, learning, talking, growing with each other, that mutual support, that collaboration, that resource sharing will help all of us be better as we implement Amplify Desmos Math in our school districts. Like I said at the start, year 1 was a great opportunity, and there's still so much learning and growing to continue to do in implementation in year 2. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Janice, who is going to have us think about how we can leverage some of those change management things that we learned last year into work that we're going to do this year.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. I just want to say it's so great to see all of you in year 2, which I think could be part of that reflection that you did earlier that Stephanie teased up, talking about the optimism and the hope. Having a year under your belt for teachers just gives them such a good sense of breathing space where they get time this year to really think about their implementation versus what happens tomorrow because I'm just still learning. So super excited to welcome you all back and join us. What we'll do this year is really spend some time thinking about the space where you are. So really thinking about, last year we talked a little bit about logic models, the idea of what do we think makes the best implementation plans work and how do we do that? We'll be spending time with our partners, meaning not just us, but the partnership between you and each other. I loved to just hear the last little nugget when we entered, like, oh, we could learn from you, or we could pick up from those spaces. That's really intentional in the design of what our goal is in the cohort. Also, to be able to dig into insights, looking at data that is shared, data that you may be collecting as you're doing learning walks, or data that may come from surveys or other pieces within that work as well. But this idea of improvement is going to be really important. It's the idea of us thinking about what went well that you spent last year doing, but also where is the space that you really want to dive in and take a closer look. So this idea of continuous improvement is going to be foundational to the work that we do this year. Just like last year, hopefully you can take out some nuggets that you can customize to your very specific need within your district that then we can help support, through these sessions here, through some coaching sessions, et cetera, some visits, et cetera, as the time comes together. So you'll see on the next slide that we spent some time last year really grounding and discussing the work that why improvement science matters, right? Maria, can we jump ahead one slide, please? There we go. Thank you. It is this idea of we really want to ground. Last year, we talked so much about change leadership and why it matters. We also now really want to get in and start pinpointing, now that we know some of those foundational things are set, thinking about the people that we work with, the pathways that we structure, et cetera. Now we want to think about some of those problems from the user angle, right? So we want to stay centered in the stakeholders and really thinking about where might there be a struggle, where might there be successes that we want to think about. And in improvement science, we can look at really small changes that we can collect data on and spread that learning quickly. The nice thing about this is it can be rapid and quick. It doesn't have to be that you wait for end of the year testing, but that you're thinking about these incremental pieces as you're working. It allows you to become a researcher in your own practice. So we often think about this in ways that we want to collect data, how we can apply this to our learning, and it gives us a chance to learn by doing, which we know research tells us actually helps us make that learning stick. One of my favorite things about improvement science is the mantra that it's possibly wrong and it's definitely incomplete. It's that idea of We sometimes write a beautiful mission and a vision and we start building it out. And then we're like, oh, but we need to add this piece to it, right? We're continuously learning and improving in the work that we're doing, and that it's okay to be wrong because we can try and test an idea. And actually, sometimes when ideas fail, we learn more than when they go well. So it's this idea of really being able to dig in and unpack on that foundation and understanding. So on the next slide, you'll see a little bit here around how we organize with improvement work and with these within these structures, excuse me. So we'll spend some time in our series of workshops, just like we did last year, where we'll spend time deepening our knowledge on improvement work. We'll provide some direct application opportunities, and then it'll be the chance for you to connect with other leaders. We know it's so critically important for you to learn from one another, knowing that you're in year 2 of implementation. Something might have went really well in another district year 1 that you can borrow, and you may offer them something that they can utilize to support their implementation. We're also going to test some ideas. So we'll integrate principles into a strategic plan and really help you think about, what do you want to zero in on, take a look. We'll build on that stakeholder engagement so that we can think about, where do they practice these changes and what can we learn from that. It may also help us implement some new ideas, practices, strategies that we can figure out as we start small. Do we want to start with 2 schools? And if it works with 2 schools, do we improve it and move it into 5 schools? And if it works 5 schools, it becomes a district-wide expectation. It also allows us to collect data and evidence that's grounded in your district and your specific needs, whether that's a grade level, whether that's across your implementation, if you're really zeroing into algebra or geometry or wherever it is that you want to take a closer look, that allows you to do that work. So that when we're in the official continuous improvement cycles, it'll give you a chance to codify what you're learning from that data collection, to help you draft a story around those lessons learned, and then really prepare you to be able to, again, share and get feedback from your colleagues in that. Really important to know around continuous improvement, it's like building a muscle. This year, we're going to dip into it. We're going to practice. We're going to do it small together. And then you can grow and can continue to develop across time. We don't want you to do something where you test an idea district wide and then find out, oh, we learned something, and now we have to go back and adjust the entire district. This is really a focus effort, so you can zero in and really be specific around what you want to look at. So we're going to ground on the next slide, just as a reminder to kind of jog the time and the space that we were together around some of the change leadership ideas. So on the next slide, you'll see that we spent time thinking about together that the change that happens for people, sometimes people automatically respond, change is hard. We talked a lot about last year saying, is it hard all the time? Or if we set people up for it, do we allow for the change to differ? So when you look at this vision here of the change curve, it allows us to know that we still have folks, right? That sometimes when a change comes, there's resistance. That could be from anger. It could be from fear, that people are fearful. Fear, my mouth is going too fast today. Fearful of the change, so that they have to really stop and think about, where am I in that work? Am I going to jump right on board and 2 feet in, or am I going to go a little bit straddling and say, let's see how this works? But we also know there's an acceptance phase, that we want people to get to the decision of where they are, or the integration of, I understand where this fits with what I believe and what the expectations are. Just like we talked last year, what's critically important to remember is that the change curve changes all the time, right? Somebody could be in that acceptance phase, and then something happens personally in their life, right? They've lost a family member, or something happens, they have to move. Suddenly fear might come in for them, because now they have to start thinking about, how am I going to do my planning? I'm not ready. I have to do this part that life introduces to me again. So within the change curve, nobody stays in a spot forever. Those spots shift and adjust. And our goal as the leaders who are shaping the pathways for folks are really keeping this front of mind all the time in change, is thinking about, where are our people? How do we know it? What's the evidence that tells us? And then how do we support them through the curve? So Maria's been dragging that cute little star there along that you can drag and see where do you fall, or where would you say your district is right now in that change curve? And so if you take a minute, you can drag that and show, and that will show where you think you feel like you are either personally in that change or maybe your district as a whole. If you want to do that same activity, drag and then just hit share with class, we'll be able to see folks on their change curve. You can see those stars overlay. We see a lot on that acceptance side, which again is great as we're continuing to move people on the curve. And think about that work in the change management work we've talked about, change over time, the systems and structures you all put in play for last year. If we move to the next slide, what we're going to do is zero in and talk a little bit about, again, just recentering ourselves in the change framework that we did together with Switch from Chip and Dan Heath. If you remember, we talked about the brain really has two sides to it, right? It has that rational side and the emotional side. The emotional side, when you think of the elephant, is so much bigger than the rider of the rational side that that's intentional in the design. Most of the time, people lead from change in a place of emotion where it's either trauma happened, something happened, and I had to change everything I was, my identity, who I am, and that's what they bring to the work. The amazing fun job that you lead is really thinking about both of those columns, but really creating the shape of the pathway so that you can move people along the continuum. So when we think about the rider, it is that rational side. It is the side that really is looking for clarity. They need to know what the expectations are. Where do you want them to go? How do we get them there? And what does the ultimate destination look like? So that we create this destination of a postcard for Amplify Desmos Math looks like this. And these are the steps or the critical moves that get you there. And a lot of times we have to think of that clearly so that we can name that for folks, because sometimes we think people are resistant, but for a rider, it is actually the lack of clarity for them. They need to know where they're going, how to get there, and how to pursue that outcome. When we think about the elephant, back to that emotional side, they're where we really want to find the feelings for people. We want to go into the work like the change curve we just looked at, and we want to understand truly why people are feeling a certain way or responding a certain way so that we can also help them shrink the change. Sometimes it looks really daunting to say, I need to change my entire approach to the way I've taught geometry for the past 20 years. And when we say that to people, if they don't know what that looks like and those steps, they get overwhelmed, right? And sometimes that elephant gets really tired. Sometimes we think people are lazy, but they're actually exhausted because they've been going down the pathway and they have to make a left turn. They start going left, then suddenly they have to make a right turn. And it happens all the time in systems. And so we have to think about planning for that so that people really feel excited about this work. The elephant creates the energy for the change. And for us to do this, it really allows us to grow our people. The best change that can happen is when we have cohorts of people around us who are supporting it, driving it, and aligning with us in that work. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the best part is always the part you guys may remember me saying this last year. It's the muckiness in the work. It's the middle where you've got this beautiful, start of your program. You know where you want to end. The muck is the middle because that's the fun part where you get to see how it lands in implementation. How are people handling it? What are your outcomes? Where do we need to adjust? What do we need to do? So it's our job to really tweak the environment for people in any change, help them build habits, and really rally those people around us. The more the elephant and the rider work together in unison in a habit, the more the change takes hold. And guess what happens? It becomes less hard. People understand the journey they're on. They see the support and the roads that you've built. So what we sometimes think is a people problem can often be a situation problem that we have to readjust and think through. So when we think of this, we think a lot about the people, the practices, and the processes. So we're going to dig into that a little bit on the next couple of slides. And what I'm going to ask you to do is after each section is just reflect for a minute around where you are, where you think the district is in the work, and what might be a next step. So if you just kind of want to frame that as we stop. So for people, we know that we need to build a community of resilient and inspired educators, right? And we can think about those educators being our teachers, being our principals as we talk through the engagement of our stakeholders. So we want to know people's dreams and collective efforts. They want to be unified in the goal. We talked last year about valued voice. And we know this. If a change happens to you and somebody comes in and just says, here's what it is, you stop and think, I didn't get any input on that. I didn't get a chance to say. So we want to make sure that folks have a safe space to share diverse perspectives. And those diverse perspectives can be success levels, they can be demographic representation, they can be years of experience. But what we want to do is make sure that we hear from the collective group and that their voice is valued in that. We have to find ways to have ongoing dialogue. Surveys are great. They give us a ton of information, but they're only one dip into listening to people's voice. So, how do we create some focus groups, empathy interviews, learning walks where we stop and really talk to people about this work because it's critically important? Bruce, could you unmute and read for us the quote at the bottom?
Is not just a picture of what could be, it's an appeal to our better selves, a call to become something more. Rosabeth Moss Cantor.
Thank you. So, this idea of when we set vision and create that clarity we talked about earlier, it actually allows people to improve themselves. And when they've had voice in that, it sets an agenda where people want to join that work. On the next slide, you will see again that as we continue to build that effort and that momentum here, that we really want to think about those continuous learning opportunities. Where are people continuing to grow their knowledge and their skill in order to grow? So that we can think about, are there professional development days? Are there learning cohorts that come together, PLCs? Different ways that people can continue to learn. And again, we have to think about that across the stakeholders. What does that look like for teachers, for school leaders, for our colleagues who might be principal supervisors visiting classrooms, et cetera? It also gives us a chance to offer personalized coaching. We know just as adult learners that when we come into any learning, there's things that are helpful to us, but the most helpful is when we can step outside of a learning like today and say, you know what, this is what it means for us at Global Excellence. Help us think through this so that we can customize some of those supports and really think about that. Teachers need that as well. So they get some personalized coaching based on performance, data, interactions that they're having. A critically important part that is so hard to plan for in the sense of everything else you're doing is really thinking about celebrations of achievements. And I always say they can be itty bitty steps so that you're starting to show people, what are we doing? We're building their habits. We're starting to say things like, this is the way we want to pursue the change because we're seeing those outcomes and what's happening here. Bridget, could you unmute and read the next one for us if you don't mind?
Collaborative cultures, which focus on building professional capacity and continuous improvement, are the foundation of educational change.
Thank you so much. So, really thinking about we have to empower our people. John Cotter tells us in Change that it takes 3 to 5 years to get change, right? That sustained change. A lot of times you'll see outcomes in year one, but sometimes what happens is people then say, whoa, that we've got that. Let's move on to something else. We need to make sure that we're monitoring that change and that continuous improvement over time. I think we have one more slide on people. Thanks, Maria, being our driver there. So this is the space. I just want to give you 1 minute. We're going to set the timer for you to think about the people-centered approach we talked about. For you, what's worth remembering? Just take a minute, jot that down. We'll give you a minute, and then you can share with class when your minute is up. What I love about the platform here is Maria's such a master navigator here, and she just went into the teacher screen so that you can see what other colleagues are saying. It does gives anonymity, and I can't say the word today. It makes you anonymous. I'll say it that way. So it sets you up as an expert in math or a historian in math who does the work, a mathematician, as your name here, so that you can see that. But you can see we talked, and folks are holding on to clarity of time and PD days, so that opportunity to really think about continuous learning and celebrations, finding ways to keep dialogue going, being sensitive to different teachers' needs, and really listening and collaborating. I love that when we have that opportunity to think about learning walks, we put the learning in the walk, right? That is critically important. Instead of it always being evaluative, it is a chance for us to pull voice together and really think about that work. Thank you for sharing. We're going to jump into the next piece around process. And just as a reminder, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing at the end. Just take a quick minute to kind of gather your thoughts around this segment for us to talk through. But this is the piece where you want to think back to your implementation plan or that roadmap for sustainable change. We really need to think about planning as a comprehensive process so that folks are understanding where they're going and how they're getting there. So we also want to anticipate challenges and celebrate those victories that we mentioned. Anticipating those challenges is a lot like when we ask teachers to do planning and we ask them to think about students in mind. Where might the struggle be? So that they think about through that process, what do they need to plan for so that people meet success? This is the same for you in your implementation plan. Where might there be a hang up spot for folks, right? Is it digital access? Is it really just spending time allowing students to explore and really, while I'm monitoring, not providing the answer, but allowing students the space to do the work? Those are opportunities that we want to be really thoughtful about as we continue to work. Just like we said, the voice matters. We want to make sure that people are included in the vision of the creation, so that sometimes it's okay for us to adjust and enhance the vision that we have for the work that we're doing, but we need to be transparent and clear with folks around that. We've heard from teachers with this. We've seen it in classrooms. We've talked with school leaders here, so that we have a really sustained focus. Every step needs to be deliberate, intentional, and aligned to the journey. It is so easy to get distracted because in a school district, everything is equally important. And what tends to happen is you may be moving along on a continuum of work, and then it's like, no, 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 we've got to do this today. And now we don't have planning time. And we have to think about what happens when we take away that planning time, right? That could become the obstacle that people are facing. So we've got to think about that comprehensively. And this quote was one you just saw a few minutes ago, but it's so on target for what the work is there that often we think it's resistance, but it's a lack of clarity. So that if we don't have clarity in our plan and we can't communicate that outward, it's really hard to get people to follow along for the change. So on the next slide, you'll see continued to process is also this idea of really thinking about data-driven foundations. So how do we identify unique challenges? We have to use our data to uncover the story behind each student's performance. So we've got to get to that student level. We've got to get to the teacher level. We've got to get to the school level, right? So that you can make decisions about, is this an issue in one building? And if it is, it goes back to that personalized coaching. There might have to be a conversation with the instructional coach there, or working closely with the school leader. But if you're seeing it across 9 classrooms out of your 12, that tells us it might be an issue of understanding, where then we might need to hold a PLC or a training session, or we might need to create some tools and resources for people to utilize as they're planning, as they're instructing, etc. It also allows us to develop a focused plan. We always have our implementation plan, but there's always those action steps that later today we'll talk about some short-term goals and how are those key initiatives helping you move forward while you might deprioritize other spaces, right? Do you ever hear that when you say, what could you take off your plate? And it's like you ask that question and you're like, there's not a daggone thing I could take off my plate. Right? So we have to help people understand where we are prioritizing, where we're putting the focus. And often that is in short-term steps. Just like we said before with the elephant, really helping them see it as shrinking the expectation there of where they're going. So that when we think of those goals, instead of naming June's goals, we might want to name November's goal right now because that's attainable and reachable for folks. And we often have to also be able to adjust the strategy where we review and we refine based on our learning walks, based on the data, based on the voices that we're hearing, etc. So all of those pieces matter. Janet, would you unmute and read this quote for us here?
If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else.
So true, right? Again, just being focused and where people are, we need to make sure that we're following that and keeping that journey at the forefront. Great. Idea of more teacher voice and PD days. I love that. We worked with one district last year very closely where they started bringing teachers to share their practice during PD days because it, again, built the people, rallied the herd around one another. The idea of data on all levels, being really clear and naming goals, being specific around time constraints within that. Love the idea of uncovering unique challenges for teachers or sites, as well as common challenges. How do we help each other? So how do we build that community of learning? Change process needs to be dynamic and responsive. Important to celebrate the victories. Lots of key takeaways here. Love to see that. Thank you so much for engaging there. We're going to jump into the last piece, which is really now thinking about the practice and really thinking about how do we get there? Same idea. We're going to do a couple slides and then give you a moment to reflect. But for practice, we're really thinking about those effective and evidence-based strategies. One of the reasons that led you to Amplify Desmos Math, right? Really thinking about you have the resources and the tools there. How do we empower educators to support the teaching practices within those tools? We talked earlier about the connected learning. You'll see some of the threads that carry through this. So making sure that people have voice in their work and can see their unique style and abilities, but at the same time, stay grounded in the teaching practices that are evident and important there. We want to foster continuous exploration, opening doors for ongoing professional development and learning opportunities. Some of those you just named. Ways to bring cohorts of teachers together, ways to look at the professional learning where you can leverage the expertise and excellence in your district or in a certain school and take that and spread that across. And really helps enable the seamless implementation so that the intentionality and the execution really allow accessibility for all students. We're really looking at math being an equity lever so that all students have the ability to learn together, to talk together, to grow together, and to really become expert mathematicians in the work that they do while they're learning in a supportive community alongside of them. So that's critically important as well. Marissa, can we ask you to unmute and read this quote for us?
I don't mind reading it.
Thanks, Jen.
Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. Bill Gates.
So important. Goes back. Thanks, Jen, for reading that for us. Again, thinking about those goals we talked about, right? We often spend so much energy and think we can get it all done in 1 year, where we have to think the long game and really think about the strategies of what we want to do across time. On the next slide, you'll see that continuity there again, connected back to what we said earlier when we talked about people, because it's critically important for that shared vision and culture that there's unified purpose, that people feel like this is the right movement because they've been part of it versus our principal ordered a new curriculum or our district leader said we had to do X. Right? This is the space where we all want teachers to believe this is the right thing for students because they see the success in the conversations, in the thinking, in the development work that they do. We want to focus on collective energy for that positive outcome. So again, where do we see bright spots of what's happening and what's happening well? And then how do we elevate that so that people have the chance to grow together and see others? I know when I led the work in Baltimore, that we were able to share vision, share information, but where the change really happened was when a fifth grade teacher saw another fifth grade teacher getting results, or an eighth grade teacher saw another eighth grade teacher, and they shared their student work to see what happened, because they were able to see the community of, these are our students. These are the same issues that we're facing. Again, those celebrations of success are critical so that people feel inspired, they feel hopeful, but they also see a testament to the unified work that you're doing so that people can move forward together in that. Sonia, could you read the next one for us?
Yes, let me unmute.
Thank you.
When you ask people to participate in the change effort, it creates a vested interest in making it happen. Peter Senge.
So important, right? You see, hopefully, the thread of what we're talking about, that the investment and the time for you to get voice is critically important. Thank you. Next slide. We're almost finished, I promise. But the idea here too is that we want that continuous feedback, and the adaptation that we have to do has to be clear to folks that you value feedback. Collecting surveys, doing learning walks, having focus groups is great, but if you never share back what your takeaways were from that, or transparently communicating that, you're leaving people to guess. And again, the clarity is not there for them. So we want to make sure we can say things like, we've spent the past 3 weeks and we visited 42 classrooms, and here's the trends we saw. Or we did focus groups and here's what we heard. So that people are really clear, and not only are you doing it as a relational kind of piece, but that you're taking the feedback to adjust. That shows people that you have an adaptive culture, where you're creating an environment where you have clarity of a vision, but you're also adapting based on the need of what's happening, with the goal of always improving. The idea of continuous improvement is our constant support and the goal of what we want to get to in everything that we do. Sheila, could you unmute and share this next quote for us, please?
The capacity to reflect on actions so as to engage in a process of continuous learning is one of the defining characteristics of professional practice. Donald Scone?
Thank you. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So the idea again of that continuous learning, it's part of our professional responsibility, right? You've all heard the analogy when we talk about doctors and their practice with rounds. This is our idea here in education, for us to continue to dipstick, understand, and move forward. So there's one more slide on practice, because as I said, this is the exciting work for you as you're shaping pathways here, is that we are helping smooth transitions too. When we talked about anticipating obstacles, part of our goal is to navigate people's anxieties, questions, and frustrations, right? If we are thinking comprehensively about this and thinking about the people as a whole, it helps us prepare for things like board meetings. We're not going to be surprised to have a teacher community coming and really sharing that they're frustrated, because we're going to already know that from conversations, and we're going to have made a decision about what we need to do with that. We also want to promote resilience. When we talked about celebrating before, not only that, we want to reward people for sticking to it on the destination. This is hard work, right? Teaching is not for the faint of heart, as we all know. And teaching mathematics is difficult too. So we have to think about those components, just like teaching literacy is difficult, teaching science is difficult, learning anything new can be difficult. So we want to focus and really help people understand that the reward is in their outcome of the work they're doing. So that again, we're building that culture of hope and inclusion, because we know transformation is a process, it's not an event. We have to think about that totality of the experience. So again, we're going to give you a minute to kind of reflect on practices and think about what really resonated with you on the next slide, so that as you take your minute to reflect, you can think about what are your pieces within the practice for you to consider your takeaway to hold on to. So we'll give you a minute here. And Maria will share with us the screen again so we can see some of your colleagues' thoughts in that. So again, the adaptive culture around improvement, trends of the learning walks, really promoting resilience, creating that community where we've collected feedback, shared feedback, I love this collective teacher efficacy, really using that energy for reflection and inquiry. And staying close to the practitioners is critically important. That is so deep, right? Because when we talk about improvement, it is staying focused on the user, really spending time in the work there. So thank you for that. I know that was a lot of me talking, which I don't love to do, but hopefully there were some insights for you within that. Now we're going to think about your people. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but this idea of really mapping your stakeholders. We talked last year about you have a vast group of stakeholders, right? You have your students, you have your teachers, you have your parents, you have community partners, you have your school board. All of those folks fall into importance in the work that you're doing. So when we look at the axis here, we can see that when we talk about trust, we can go from low to high trust, right? When we look at this blocks model, we can also look across to see that we have agreement from low to high. And what this tells us is that if we have high trust and we have high agreement, those are the people that are traveling right alongside of us, right? When you think back to year one, they were your eager folks who were like, this is great, we got it, we're trying it, we're moving. They're what we call your allies. They're your folks who share your vision, they want to succeed and help you in that. They treat you as if they are part of the organization or even members of your team. They provide critical resources, information, and expertise. So they're your group that are there. They might be your group that are your model teachers or demonstration teachers where you can pull them together. You might also have folks that have high trust because they believe in you and they believe that things are going to happen, but they have low agreement. They would be the opponents to this change, right? So they're people who have conflicting visions. They might say, I've done this before and it worked for me. I'm not sure this is the right place where we're going. They may challenge your efforts. They may even provide some expertise that is leveraged too, right? You could also have folks that are low agreement, low trust. They're your adversaries. They're the people where they have been through something, where we talked earlier about emotional trauma, where they were forced to do something, or they might have been in a school where you had the compliance police principal with the red pen coming through, and there weren't learning walks, right? There were walks, but they were just coming through to take information into red pen to talk about. They might have reservations or be really concerned or resistant to the change. When we think about where people are on this map, right, we also have neutrals who could just be non-committal. They're like, I'm here, I'm getting paid to do what I do. I'm going to show up until you tell me to do something differently. And then you have fellow travelers. What we have to do is think about where do we map the different people. We could map people on our implementation team. We could map our school leaders. If I'm a school leader, I could map my teachers. If I'm an instructional coach, I can map my teachers where they fit, right? This is not the kind of map where we're physically putting people's names in and sharing with somebody. This is something that allows us to put in our head, where are people in the conversation? So when we're getting voice and buy-in, we want to keep them alongside of us in this work. And we want to make sure that even if we have adversaries or opponents, they're at the table with us because they're going to make our implementation better. They're going to help us think comprehensively about the work. So on the next slide, you'll see that as we continue to dig into this and build on the work that you did last year, we also, when we know who they are, now we need to know what do they need. So that when we think about this, we can now think about the influence of the stakeholder as well as the interest of the stakeholder. So that if we have someone who has a lot of influence and a lot of interest, we have to manage them most thoroughly, right? Those are going to be our principals. Those are going to be our teachers, where we have to really think about what's the communication they need? What's the knowledge and skill they need? I'm going to be doing them and talking to them all the time and tapping into them. Where somebody who might have less influence might be a board member, right? They have influence in a different way, but in your influence of your implementation, but they have, interest within that. We can then come back. Oops, I think something happened. Thanks, Maria. That we can see they might need regular minimal contact. They need updates, but they don't need communication every week to tell them about the work. So that when we think about this, we think about who they are and what they need so we can get to those outcomes. Next slide. So we're going to do a little bit of stakeholder mapping to really think about the comprehensive use of this exercise and tool that we talked through. And so what we'll do is just dive in and take an example and take a look. I think Jen is going to share with us on her screen so that we can look in. It's really this idea. I just want you to look across the headers for a minute, that we have the stakeholder group identified. We think about what is their role and responsibility in the district as well as in this implementation. What support do they need to be effective in the work that they're doing? What structures exist for them to be supported? Who is delivering the learning and the message and how? And what does success look like for those folks and for you within the implementation? Who is accountable for supporting the success? How is it measured? So that idea before, like we said, of being really clear, what is the data telling us? So that as we're observing, what are we collecting and what do we learn? And then also, what's the expectation for follow-up? So we've had this comprehensive look. What I want to do is just kind of think through an example with one of you so that we could look at this together. You can see this is an example from another development that we've done where we looked at coaches and we went through and thought about the roles, the responsibilities, etc. Is there anybody who would like to raise their hand or unmute that would like to do a think aloud with us through this? Might want to think through principals or through teachers.
That's what I was going to just share, Janice, was principals.
Great.
And assistant principals at the high school level of curriculum and instruction.
Awesome. Sonia, will you be willing to be our thought partner in filling this chart for a few minutes? Great.
Yes.
Jen has the fastest fingers in the country. I'll put her across that whole map so she'll kind of gather our thinking as we talk together out loud. What would you say the roles and responsibilities of principals? I'm just going to say principals, it can include assistant principals, are in your district.
So with regards to the math implementation, correct?
Correct.
So they are ensuring that that the Amplified Desmos curriculum is being implemented in the classrooms. They support that implementation, guide it, gather feedback, make adjustments.
Great. So they need a lot of knowledge, right? They need to understand the curriculum. They need the skill of being able to ensure that they can lead folks. So sometimes, to your point, Sonia, the things that can fit for principals are within the implementation, but then it opens up a whole broad arena, right, of the support. So let's talk about what are the supports they need to be able to do that. I'm just going to start by naming they need a knowledge of Amplified Desmos math, right?
Yes, they
What
do.
else?
They need knowledge of how to give feedback, like what they're looking for in the classroom first, what that looks like in real, like visually speaking, a teacher implementing their curriculum, and then how to give feedback.
Great. And I think they also need a sense of understanding change, right? Because those pieces that we talked a little bit about before, they need to understand where their teachers are. So they need to maybe figure out ways to collect voice beyond just a learning walk. So, are they having teacher conversations? Are they part of their teacher collaborative planning sessions, etc.?
Correct. They also need to have their own emotional management.
I love that.
And regulation so that they don't get caught into too much of the emotional energy that is surrounding the implementation.
Great. So they need some collegiality as well, right? They need some space where principals can talk to principals. They can plan out how things are going, as well as they need some learning sessions directed, because I love that you said in the one, they need to know what it looks like in practice. They can't figure that out on their own, right? We want to make sure there's some normative work happening across the district. So that might mean they need some expectations set. They need some practice walks where they can give feedback. They need to build that muscle. We can't make the assumption that all principals can do that, right? I'm not saying you're making that assumption. I'm just putting frames out there. So that we want to think about all of the skill they need and the support that they need. Guess what? Now we've got a plan of action so that we have to think about how are we going to get them all of those things in the box, right?
Correct.
Anya, what supports exist in your district currently for you to be able to help principals through this work?
So we have professional learning days that are centered for our math teachers around Amplify Desmos. We also have focused learning or walks that are happening in classrooms in tandem with Amplify Desmos. We have, and which is one that's kind of at the forefront of my mind right now, just considering this learning today, is we have our principals leadership team meetings. And so how can we give doses of things to them in that space at different intervals? We have our math leadership team meetings. And Janet, Marianne, let me know if I've missed anything.
I love it.
I was thinking about the just the work that we're doing with this group and having Amplify come and doing 2 sets of learning walks, and sort of that's the setup for that common vision and giving feedback.
Mhm.
Great. I love too that you all have pulled out here, not just the things that principals are responsible for, but the space for them to learn and grow, right? So to your point where you were saying your principal leadership team meetings, is that a space where you can watch a video together and do a artificial learning walk that happens in a same room, right? Where you can norm around things, or can you hold it in a school and you do a learning walk together that is training for your principals? And leveraging those spaces and time for those things to happen, because we want to make sure comprehensively we have that going across, right? Then we think about who is delivering the message and how. There might even need to be some coaching supports built in for your principals, right? I forgot that one in the last box. But the idea of you might not have all principals that you set it up in the session and they're masterful when they walk out, right?
Mhm.
We may have to do some coaching and spend some time side by side with them. So when we think about that, then we think about who is in charge of delivering that work and that message.
So it's a variety of people. Myself, Dr. Hugh, Executive Director of Secondary, Janet, our instructional support specialist. It might be in coordination with Amplify Desmos, coaches.
Yep, absolutely. And what you're doing here is starting to map the other pieces so that if we had all the time in the world, which we don't, I know it's 2 hours, seems like a lot, but we could spend forever. But then what would happen is I'd need to go down to the next row and start for my instructional coaches, because now I need to say, what's their role and responsibility in this work? What support do they need? How are we getting them that support? When you look at this, I'm not going to finish the whole block because we're a little over time here, but the idea of what does success look like, right? Sonia, when you and your team have time after today to sit and reflect and think about what does this look like for principals, I'm going to assume some things are like you would see principals in classrooms on a regular basis. You would be able to collect data from them around what trends they're seeing in their buildings. You would be able to walk side by side with them. You could be able to see that principals are sitting in collaborative planning sessions and having real conversations embedded in the mathematical work that is happening in their building. And then when we want to go to who is accountable for supporting, again, you would differentiate that based on your goals, so that if it's Janet's role to make sure that she's building the learning agenda, she's got to focus. But if it's somebody's job to coach, we have to make sure they're clear and intentional in that work as well. So what I'm hoping that you see in this Think Aloud is that this is very, very important, because this sometimes becomes something that falls on the back burner, right? It's just like when we say something to teachers like, do you have engaging conversations where students are learning in your classroom? Every teacher is going to say yes, right? But when we zero into are the conversations that are happening actually fostering learning, sometimes we see they are, sometimes we see they're not. It's the same with stakeholders. When we say, who are your stakeholders in the work? You know who they are. When we say, what are they doing? You have an idea, but now you see the comprehensive nature of this sheet so that it helps you build out your plan. So when you look across your system, you're really thinking about what are those intentional learning strands that you're building. Because then we would continue to go and say, how are we measuring it, right? That could be data collections, surveys, outcomes, etc. What is the information or evidence we're collecting? And then how do we adjust? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense to everybody. This is an exercise that can seem tedious because it helps you build out, but until you do this, you also don't see the interconnectedness between your people and between your plan within the work. So my hope for you will be that you will be able to go through this. You may divide and conquer too, right? Like Sonia just did it through thinking about principals and APs. And then Janet may do it thinking through her instructional coaches. And then you may have somebody else think through the teacher lens and then come together to look at them and see where the interconnectedness is. This is really critical. Sonia, thank you for opening up with us and walking through that.
Absolutely.
Great. So you'll see on the next slide that we want you to take a minute to just do a little self-reflection based on the discussion we've had. Where do you see yourself on this journey of stakeholders in the implementation, really creating buy-in, creating voice? Would you say you're beginning, developing, or proficient in that scale? When you think through it, think what your stakeholders would say. Just like we said, people are user-centered here. And then what's your evidence? So if you say, we've got this, we're proficient, that means that if you went to talk to a teacher in X building, they would say, I know the vision, I have the supports I need, we're golden, and you know that because of. So you'll see that you've got a little drag feature here that allows you to make your robot really happy or make your robot a little pensive. He's not angry yet. He's just a little pensive, right? He's thinking through what are the next steps of what we want to do in this work. So we're going to give you a minute here to just reflect. You can put your robot in where you feel your robot is and then add your evidence or your thought to the text box. And then we'll again share those together. Give you about another 30 seconds. And I believe we're jumping into breakout rooms here just to share some initial thinking. Maria, can you give me a head nod if that's right? I don't see you on my screen now, but I just want to, yes, it is right. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I know I'm a little bit over time, so just checking on our maintenance here. So I'm going to ask Maria to put us in those breakout rooms. Again, just thinking about where you are and what's your evidence around that, and then we'll come back together. Thanks, Maria. Stephanie, thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I don't know about you, but I managed to once again cut myself off at like the tail end of a sentence. So hopefully you all had some great conversations in your breakout rooms as well. I'm going to pass it back to Janice to talk to us a little bit about understanding improvement principles.
Thanks, Stephanie. The conversations are so rich in the breakouts. I wish we could stay together for like 4 hours. I know that's probably not your wish, but in doing that, I just think seeing the depth of what we started with around people, practice, and process, and then through mapping and how that interconnectedness comes. So holding all of that, knowing that you've got space and time for you to follow up as your designated teams need to. We're going to dive just a little bit into improvement principles, what they are and why. So on the next slide, you'll see a definition for continuous improvement that really allows us to think about often thinking about the things we talked about earlier, that they're iterative cycles of evaluation and adjustment aimed at increasing efficiency, effectiveness, and stakeholder satisfaction. The efficiency piece is really important because I said they're quick, remember? That CI is a mindset and practice that encourages regular reflection and small incremental changes rather than significant overhauls. You're not trying to change everything that's happening in the implementation. It is rooted in the belief that opportunities for improvement always exist, no matter how well a process might already be performing. So that's really important for us just to align around the contextual understanding behind. So we'll look on the next couple of slides just at some terminology around what does continuous improvement mean and feel like. You'll see here, those were the ones we highlighted, that stakeholders are at the center. This is incremental in the work that you're doing. User focused is the most important, that it is data informed decisions, that you're pulling data through every process, that it is a systematic approach, and that you're creating feedback loops where people can massage what you're learning and figure out, did that fix the problem? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to go back, etc.? So you can see here that we have a PDSA. Many of you may have heard of these things before or have engaged in improvement science, but it's a plan, do, study, act model. This is the cyclical nature for testing and implementing ideas. So you create a plan to address an issue of concern. You try it out, right? Whatever the plan is, that's your do or your test. You study the results to see if the thing you think changes something makes it better, and then you act on what you learned. Similar to what I said before, if you study something and it works in 3 classrooms, you institute it to 6 classrooms, then you build it to 15, then it goes across the district. So that we'll be studying that as we work together. There's also a driver diagram, which is a way to have a visual display of your theory of what drives and contributes to your aim. What do you want to test? What kind of an idea do you want to see? Do you want to see how independence of students' thinking comes through talk? And how do we test that idea? There can be primary drivers of the idea as well as secondary drivers. Remember what I said, we're going to learn this across the year. So it'll be ways for you to figure out, if we think this is a lever that's going to make a difference, what can we do to adjust and change that? And then we'll create some process maps together where it's a representation of your ideas and your steps, the processes that you're doing to really get to that improvement. It'll then get us to some root cause analysis where we'll be able to really use a question strategy. Many of you have probably heard of the 5 whys, like teachers are continuing to differentiate or leave the curriculum and supplement. Why? Because they don't like this activity. Why? Because it's really hard to teach. Why? Because they don't have enough planning time. Why? Right? So we drill down to get to a really specific idea that we want to test, when that question may have come that they don't have enough planning time. So now we have to test an idea to figure out what we want to do with that. And then I hope you've gotten the flavor throughout all of today that the stakeholder voice and piece in this work of engagement is crucial to you moving forward. So the process has to involve people that are impacted, ensuring their insights and needs guide the process. This is also why I said to you, this isn't going to be across your entire district. You might want to focus on 2 classrooms or 3 teachers or 1 building, but we'll help refine that as we continue to come together. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to share some ideas in thinking through a problem of practice.
Yeah, so before we hop into the problems of practice, and I'm going to steal the screen share here, or take the screen share from Maria. I got a little notification, like alert on my wrist saying that like I needed to do like a little stand break, even though I'm currently standing. So I'm gonna do actually a little movement break. So if you would be so kind to, in a moment, when I say go, you're gonna turn your cameras off. You have like quick 30 seconds in your space around you. I would like you to touch 3 different walls. The ceiling and the floor do not count, but we still need to have some sort of movement here, okay? I'm gonna do the same thing and then we're gonna get back to it. So ready, set, camera off, and go. See you back in about 30 seconds. Thank you. And I can tell people have actually done the assignment because I see some empty chairs coming back. I see Bruce probably was really quick at doing that. Thank you so much, everybody. But let's go ahead and talk about this idea of problems with practice. So, as we work together, in terms of like working and implementing Amplified Decimal's math with our schools, we are really excited to not only celebrate all the successes along the way, but also one of the things that we will be, asking throughout the course of our journey together is like, where are some opportunities for us to grow? So we wanted to take a time to share like a systematic approach that will help us move from like the guessing part or assuming like what are some areas that we want to grow in, to actually knowing like where we need to spend our time focusing our support efforts. So let me jump over to this screen here and like how can we identify like those opportunities to grow. And this reminded me really of when I was learning about this, it reminded me of this publication that came out called The Classroom Chef. It was written by two math educators in Southern California, John Stevens and Matt Fodry. They had this thing where they submitted, they gave their students a teacher report card every semester where it was completely anonymous. Students wrote in like, how do you feel like math class is going? How can I improve as a math teacher? How can I just improve as a teacher to support you in your learning? And they said that the feedback was so great. And I remember when I would do that with my students, I was thinking, this is so awesome, but I'm learning this information a little too late. It was like semester, and I wish I got that feedback a little bit sooner, which is something I really love about our curriculum because at the end of our lessons, we give students the opportunity to share something familiar with like check-ins, like how do you feel about the math taught today? How are you feeling about class just being taught? All those things. And we encourage you to do something similar with similar check-ins with your educators and your team along the way. So looking at all these things and what are some things we do like pulse checks are really like short and strategic way to collect data at moments to gather information on like how your team is feeling and experiencing the work of Amplified Decimal's math. You know, some of you are saying like we're feeling really good using words like innovative, terrific, the school years. But then this will also give you some insight to maybe some folks that maybe need a little extra TLC, and it will give you real-time data to learn from and to plan some next steps. And they're really meant to be supportive. You're not looking at these to be evaluative or like a report card, like saying, hey, like, all right, what lesson are you on in terms of pacing? We're really looking to, understand more and respond in both a qualitative way and a quantitative way. So you can do short checks, like in terms of getting some just quick little data where those surveys are targeted and concise. So you can give out like a 3 to 5 question survey that teachers can complete, where it's maybe focused on an instructional goal that you have as a math team or the district level. Maybe it's around like using the curriculum materials, student engagement, student talk, integrating like digital pieces of the curriculum. So things like that. And again, the intention is to get a wide range of perspectives. A second thing is you can also conduct some empathy interviews. And I noticed that some of you were talking about that earlier in the session or some of your responses, which are really one-on-one conversations using open-ended questions to get a better understanding on teachers' experiences in a specific area you would like to grow on. So again, consider like the goals that you have set in terms of, overarching goals with math instruction, but maybe there's a goal that you want to focus on for this particular year. And third, the empathy mapping is where you're creating like a shared understanding of what you're hearing. And you might map out what teachers are feeling, thinking, saying, or doing in relation and implementation. So it could be like categorizing different things, but it's a visual process to help you see patterns across all the feedback that you're gathering and to really bubble up and prioritize what problems of practice or the areas of growth need immediate attention versus like longer term support. So lots of good things here. And what we want you to just take a moment right now, and we're, getting closer to the end of the time, but we wanted to give you time back with your team to really just talk about this. And I'm going to set the stage and we'll release you into breakout rooms. But what we want you to do is to really narrow that focus and identify like an area of growth, identify some successes, problems, opportunities within your implementation, and where can we maybe narrow the focus of the work ahead and ways that we may be able to monitor and collect data. So initially we're going to give you some think time, but I think this is like based off of what I'm hearing from like different groups, it seems like we're ready to just jump on in and just start collaborating type of a thing. So if you would be so kind to just go ahead in your groups, if along the way, if you can just type in your notes into this section, and then when we come back after the breakout rooms, what we're going to ask you to do is a quick like 1 minute share between all the groups, really quick. Jim, this will be a space for us to capture notes of what we're hearing from other folks as well. So we'll send you to breakout groups, and we're thinking about maybe 8 minutes or so. So and then we'll come back and do that quick whip around and close out our session. All right, team. We'll see you over there. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for that. And I know that at least in my breakout room, we were having some really stellar conversations going on. I'm going to open up a few screens here. So if you were able to jump to screen 38 here, I'm also going to just restrict you to those screens as well. But on screen 38 is a chance for you to record, um, things that you're hearing from the group. So just due to time, and I want to make sure that we're respectful and on time, if I can ask like folks from the Amplify team who are represented in each group to just do a quick little recap of what you discussed, and I can go first. I was with a group from Santa Barbara, and one of the things that we were talking about is having students using the platform, more of the digital lesson component. And it was brought up about it'd be really interesting to do some sort of empathy interviews and really getting at the 5 whys about why is this, because it can really give us some really good insights about how teachers are thinking, both like teachers and even administrators, and some belief structures too that are happening. I'll pass it over to maybe Maria. I saw you came off mute, so thank you.
Yeah, of course. So we had a really good conversation, Bridget and I. One of her big questions is how do we use the Launch Monitor Connect framework to give teachers structured flexibility, right? Allowing them to add their own pedagogical moves while maintaining lesson integrity and productive struggle within the geometry classroom. So Bridget had a great idea for continuing to focus on that Launch Monitor Connect framework. So we're excited to get to work on that.
Great. I can take Superior next. Amazing conversations, really grounded in thinking through. They have a core number of teachers who want more practice time, which they're apprehensive about because it takes away from the alignment of timing and PLC planning and work that teachers are doing. So really investigating what's the cause of that issue. They also have a focus on tier 2 instruction, which we all know sometimes makes people spend more time there than in their tier 1. So looking at trying to unpack some of those things. Love the alignment, Maria, because we did the same and talked a little bit about the Launch Monitor Connect, and that some of the teachers who might be really proficient in this are really leveraging their monitoring time to collect data about how students are performing, which is practice. So how do we remessage or really understand that? So bringing that time and energy together to maybe work with some teachers who have it under their belt and are proficient to understand what's happening there, and then taking that to test in some classrooms where people are struggling to see if we can get some magic sauce identified there that can be spread across the district as a whole.
Marissa and I had a great time chatting, and we sort of linked back to conversations that we had earlier in our other breakout rooms together. And so we talked about their new student-centered model and how these stop, jot, and share questions are really the questions we want to ask teachers. Like, what do our students already know? And what is the evidence that we know, like identify what they know? And then we spent a little bit of time talking about the differentiation table in the curriculum and how that differentiation table can be used alongside of what students know in their evidence to either strengthen what students already know, stretch students who might already know the content, or support those students who are still sort of struggling with some of the things without having to necessarily stop grade level teaching to keep them moving forward in their learning.
Thank you so much, team, for those recaps. It sounds like we are in some great conversations. Wish we can be in 4 different places at once. I'm going to bring you all to this screen here. And I know that there was good conversations amongst your group, and you're probably hearing some other ideas, maybe some people you want to connect with. So if you can take just about 30 to 45 seconds to answer this question, like right now, if you just stream of conscience, what are your immediate next steps? And what are some next steps for your team that you're going to have with you for today? Here's the space. Go ahead and write it down for yourself. And then I'm going to stop sharing and let my wonderful colleague Maria take us home.
Maria, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alrighty, so while people are working on there, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to go ahead and chat through screen 40 and 41, but we'll also send these in a follow-up email, okay? So I'm going to go through these fast, but I promise I'll draw it all up for you so that you'll have it in an email. So here we go. On the screen, we're focusing on implementation with intention and how we move from our great lesson ideas, right, to daily classroom reality with Amplify Desmos Math. So I'll go ahead and paste this over to screen 40 here. And we're going to go ahead and look at, we have a brand new teacher supports in the PD library there. So I hope that you all have a chance to kind of look at that. And this is where people in practice could live. There's a lot of micro learning within these resources, some quick hits on pacing, pausing, snapshot, and sequencing. And you'll find short and full lesson videos that are going to model for your teachers Launch, Monitor, Connect, as well as snapshotting and synthesizing. You're also going to find a lot of really great planning templates to write the lesson goals and select essential screens. Up next, we have unit overview videos. And this is going to sit at the intersection of process and practice. I remember someone earlier mentioned, they wanted more clarity. That could be something that people would think about, right? So these could help with that. These are short walkthroughs of each unit storyline and the big synthesis moments of the lessons. And these matter because they compress expertise, right, within a short time. Teams can use them to plan with the end in mind and reduce that I'm going to have to teach everything overload. And here you're going to find the unit goals and assessment targets. You're going to find, you maybe start thinking about anticipated misconceptions and supports. And you could consider using this in a grade level PLC. So cohorts can watch the videos, create a plan with the goal in mind, and then it just helps them think about, okay, what are the essential screens when I'm running through these lessons? Where can I plan for some really great synthesis, right? And then up next, we're going to have the expanded caregiver support on Caregiver Hub. And here I would think about it as people and process because caregivers are just a big part of the system, right? And these are plain language unit explanations, sample problems, and tips to support that math talk at home. And these matter because they're going to increase access and coherence for students. It reduces the mixed messages between school and home. What are we talking about at school? What are we talking about at home? And teachers could include the hub link and the what to expect in this unit blurb in their family newsletters at the start of each unit. And then lastly, I know somebody mentioned practice, but we do have this additional item bank resources. And again, we're going to provide you with access to all of these. And this is going to land on that practice and process, right? It is a bank of high quality searchable items that you can use to build practice sets and assessments. Teachers are going to love this because they can filter and customize and assign quickly. And they matter because it's going to save planning, right? When we're thinking about how can we remove some obstacles, this is going to help teachers save so that they don't have to create from scratch, right? You can use these after reviewing the check for understanding screens, right? They take a look at that and think to themselves, you know what? I could probably pull like 3 to 5 targeted items for the next day, some mini check-ins or small group practice. So please feel free to access those. And just this implementation with intention means that we're using the right tools at the right time. And I hope that these 4 resources help us plan with clarity, thinking about, how can we bring in caregivers, right? How can we create targeted practice? And you might take a quick minute to consider the name of a teacher or a team or a school even that might benefit from using these. And we'll make sure that you have access to those. On screen 41, you're going to see some application for the learning that we had today. Some ideas for immediate application, right? Maybe you choose one that you want to really focus on, right? Identify one specific stakeholder group that you'd like to engage with or celebrate one victory. I heard somebody say that celebration was important earlier, right? Think about, what's one victory I could celebrate just this week? Short term, how do you apply this? Maybe you conduct a clarity audit, right? Daniel was talking about some of that, auditing the thinking that's going around. Ask 3 people to explain what's the initiative, create or define one data point you'll track regularly, at least, right? Establish one new support system or remove one implementation barrier. And then long term, start thinking about a formal feedback loop, right? How are you getting feedback from all of the stakeholders involved in your implementation? Build in regular celebration and recognition. I know Bridget sends out newsletters and celebrates all the amazing things going on at her schools, and that helps, right? With buy-in, bringing in those bright spots and showing people, hey, it can happen in our context. And then last, just creating a communication plan, right? When we're thinking about stakeholder mapping, we create that communication plan to ensure that everybody feels heard. Oh, my heart is beating like if I was doing cardio because I talk so fast. But we'll send all that information to you in a follow-up. But I do want to share with you that we did create this really cool resource here, which is just a resource with all the links, again, using the tools at the right time, right? For strategic and plannings and guides, we went ahead and dropped some ideas there for you. The implementation journey, what that could look like, the math change management playbook, and the switch framework, which is everything that Janice chatted about today, as far as switch is concerned. And then the practical tools are on there, as well as some key takeaways. You know, what are some key takeaways that we can take away from today? Just like we use in the vocabulary within the actual curriculum, you'll find them there. And then lastly, I'll go ahead and move through. What are your next steps? We would love for you to share some feedback, right? So go ahead and drop some feedback in our survey. This is really going to help inform our next steps. Tell us how we're doing. Tell us how to improve, because we want to just make this better. This was like a lot of learning today as we start laying the groundwork for what's coming, right? There's going to be a lot more opportunities for us to learn from each other, to work with each other. We just had to lay that groundwork so that we're all ready for the next session. And please feel free to apply your learning. I hope that gave you some ideas for how you can apply some of what you've learned today. Connect with your problem of practice team. Create a plan. We'll distribute to the beginning of the year survey. So Daniel, Stephanie, and I will get with you on that. So if you're like, what's that? Don't worry, we'll follow up with you. And then feel free to schedule a follow-up with us. If you're not meeting with us in the next week or two, feel free to schedule some time with us. We'd love to chat and go through all of this with you. Wow. I was scheduled for 20 minutes and I think I did that in 7. So yes. All righty. Did somebody drop the survey link in the chat? I think somebody did. Yeah, Daniel, thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in there. Come off mute. We'd love to hear them. We're always happy to stick around and answer any questions that might have come up. And if not, please fill out the survey. Look out for that follow-up. We'll send the recording. We'll send you all the tools that you need to keep going. And we are just very excited to see you on October 30th. So thank you all so much for stopping by with us. It was really great learning with you. We're here as long as you need us.